Hello everyone and welcome to Cavisson Webcast series. Today's topic is importance of monitoring within test environment. I'm your host and presenter today. My name is Shashank Srivastav. I'm responsible for product management, global marketing and strategic initiatives at Cavisson Systems. Well, I believe all of you are staying home and helping to flatten the curve. While it may look that easy, all of us probably have figured out that it's not that simple, even when we are working at home and trying to keep the business processes and conversation going. Actually, it's a lot more complex than what you see currently on your screen. Only those who have prepared or who are prepared can perform well. And there are numerous things that needs a specific focus in terms of preparation, especially in these unprecedented times, especially in these challenging times when everybody is struggling because of unprecedented load on certain systems or applications to keep moving your business. There are certain elements that need focus and are very important. And one of these elements is basically the importance of monitoring within the test environment. Now, in this webcast, I'm not even going to argue the importance of test environment. I'm assuming all of those who are present here already know the importance of having a solid test or performance environment. But what we are going to discuss is the benefits that one can reap by having monitoring enabled, and not just monitoring, deep dive monitoring enabled within the test environment. So this is what the agenda of this webcast sessions looks like. We are going to share certain results that are derived out of a survey that we rolled out almost 3 months back, highlighting common misconceptions, challenges related to the test environment, their test environments, impacts of not having monitoring capabilities within a test environment, what these monitoring capabilities should look like, specific tangible benefits arising out of the monitoring, and then, of course, how Cavisson can help. Now, let me talk about the survey findings that we had. We had more than 250 respondents from over 100 companies with a balanced mix of hierarchies of respondents across these organizations. So the key highlight of the findings are, as you see on your screen, the 70% of the respondents admitted that APM is a priority during production crisis, or rather APM becomes the priority. Now what that means is, and after having a detailed conversation, it is believed that APM is the first thing that comes to their mind when there's an issue or when there's a production crisis. That is the first thing that comes to almost 70% of the respondents. They believe APM can do wonders for them. 65% of the respondents cited that even when they had APM in place, but because of the absence of a proper test environment, they had a low return on investment on APM, which is Application Performance Management. Well, 35% of the respondents admitted that they had monitoring capabilities within their test environment. And almost all these 100% of the respondents out of these 35%, almost all of them had faster improvements because they had a good performance test strategy with them. And those who didn't have a proper test environment admitted that almost 30% of the issues always remain open during a test cycle, which means that out of all the issues or bugs identified within a production environment, of these reported, on an average, 30% remain open within any test cycle. Now, that's the key thing. Why these 30% of the issues remain open? That's the key question to be answered. Now, it's basically because of the inability to truthfully reproduce production issues within the test environment. And it's not the question of reproducing issues. It goes even further. How would you monitor? How would you validate and certify these fixes? That's also equally important. And all of this should happen within the test environment. The reason why this should happen within the test environment is that you cannot rely on your production environment to monitor and fix or validate the fixes, right? And that's almost the 80% of the respondents, observe that these are the key challenges, that occur within the test environment, which can only be eliminated by enabling monitoring. And what those key challenges are, basically reproduction of production issues. Now I'll take an example. Let's say we have to reproduce a high response time because of a method or a DB query or a network delay. Even if this has been identified within the production environment with use of an APM, you can still go and reproduce this probably in your test environment and then ask your engineers to fix it. But how would you reproduce these issues by observing precise stats? Unless you have a deep dive monitoring, you won't be able to obtain a method timing. Unless you have monitoring enabled, you probably won't be able to focus on a specific DB query taking time. And then how would you validate that these are the issues? Even if your engineers or your development teams have fixed those issues, how are you going to ensure by doing a performance testing that the issue has been closed forever and is basically was only related to what was observed in the production environment? What if the issue was contributed by more than one element, which could be a DB method as well as certain configuration settings within the application server itself? So all of these basically poses great challenges to the organizations who do not have a proper test strategy, and within a test strategy do not have monitoring, deep dive monitoring enabled. And hence there are certain impacts both on the business side as well as on the technology side to the organization. Now let's see what are the impacts if one does not have monitoring within a test environment. Obviously, there will be slow GTM cycles and higher costs due to inability to validate fixes, because now you'll have to validate the fixes within the production environment. So once engineers supposedly confirm that they have fixed the problem, you'll take the new release, you'll deploy it in production environment, and you'll probably wait for the next issue to occur or reoccur. And because of this inability to identify new issues due to the fixes, because now you do not have deep dive monitoring within the test environment, you probably do not know whether the fix hasn't opened up new bugs or new issues. So because you do not have, you only have to rely on the production environment to report new incidents, which is really not a very right strategy. And then, of course, all of this causes roadmap delays and deviations by almost up to 20%, which is not the right thing. So these are some of the impacts that definitely directly or indirectly incurs in higher cost to the overall enterprise. Let's look into what are the minimum required capabilities. When we say, we need to monitor or we need to enable monitoring within the test environment, what is that we should be focusing on? Of course, from the survey results, it was obtained that majority of focus is on the infrastructure or the application or the DB layers, and there was relatively less focus on end user experience monitoring. But from the best practices, we believe that this should be the priority of your monitoring initiatives. The core focus should remain on the end user experience because that is what will help you drive the business growth for any organization. So end user experience monitoring, application monitoring, DB monitoring, infrastructure as well as other components within the infrastructure or the application stack, monitoring of those, and if possible log monitoring should also be enabled because if there's anything uncaught, you will still have a chance to leverage logs to do autocorrelation and identify the issues in case these issues are uncaught at any of these layers. So that's what we term as required capabilities that you should have in terms of monitoring within the test environment. And how would you achieve all of this? This is a very, very high level architecture, and what you currently see is an architecture of typical production monitoring, or let's say performance monitoring within a production environment, typically termed as APM, application performance monitoring, where you have your own infrastructure highlighted with this particular gray color. So you have servers, you have application servers, you have database, and probably other components. So what you can do is you can instrument these, you can monitor, and then what you can do is if your interface of your application, the UI is basically a browser or a mobile application, then you can instrument that as well using a tag, which will enable end user experience monitoring, the infrastructure, application server, DB monitoring, as well as log monitoring. And ideally, what we recommend is that you should be having end-to-end monitoring enabled, comprising of all of these three component or three-layer monitoring enabled by a single solution so that you are able to achieve a unified end-to-end monitoring with just one dashboard, which will allow you to drill down from anywhere to any layer. So if you have a struggling user, you will be able to figure out what was the root cause of the struggle, irrespective whether the root cause was on the infrastructure side or on the application layer side or on the DB side. So this is a typical production monitoring architecture. And the same applies extremely well to the test environment as well, as you can see on your screen. So you have the same production monitoring applied into the test environment, except that you see here two additional components which actually are the core of performance test or the load test environment. So you have this performance or load testing software that has the capability to generate massive load, uh, simulate a lot of production specific scenarios, and then execute performance test. And then you have this service virtualization component that provides you ability to virtualize those third-party system or production system which may have your application may have dependencies on those systems. So you can mimic or mock or virtualize those services as well to create an independent integrated test environment. And within the same environment, you can have a similar sort of monitoring enabled, and not to mention everything supported and controlled by a single dashboard that will provide you insight into monitoring stats of the performance of all of these layers, including the user experience, application, server, monitoring, database, logs, etc. So this is how we recommend you achieve deep dive monitoring within the test environment, which will include user experience monitoring, server monitoring, application monitoring, database monitoring, even network monitoring, and have an autocorrelation along with the logs. So let's see a real life use case from a tier 1 retailer which had performance issues on a financial application. And these issues were primarily because of incorrect garbage collection settings. What we did here was we enabled certain monitors, system as well as application level monitors. The idea was to reproduce the performance issues that were observed in the production environment. And what we asked from the retailer was to have a similar server application setting and create a test environment for us in their in their environment, and they created a similar production specific or production like test environment for us, where we enable these monitors, system level as well as application level monitors, which included business transaction response time, transaction failures, garbage collection monitors, method monitors, etc. So the challenge which they were facing in the production environment was that they observed a lot of transaction failures, resulting in abrupt logout of users as well as unresponsiveness in the application. And this issue would probably remain for some time and then would automatically disappear. And then all of a sudden, after a certain duration of time, the issue would show up again. And then everything will become normal again. So this was a cycle that was continuously going on. So we recommended that, let's enable the monitoring within the test environment and try to figure out and see, how are different stats, performing on different layers if we execute a similar kind of test. So we were able to reproduce the real production-like scenario, and we observed using one of the features coming from our tool. And this is what happened. We used one of the features called pattern matching, which is nothing but an autocorrelation across several matrices, numerous matrices that we capture. So we identified the spike in the high response time. We were able to identify the transaction failures, as you can see on your screen. And using this particular feature called pattern matching, we were able to do a single-click root cause analysis of performance issue, which fetched us certain specific stats as the contributor to that high response time. So pattern matching allows you to look into the patterns, similar patterns to a specific stat, specific graph, and fetches you everything that could have contributed to that graph, a similar pattern that would have contributed to that graph. And here we were displayed with all the graphs related to garbage collection settings, like total time taken by GC, time taken by tenure GC, fixed memory to tenure GC, and so on. So all of these 5 different stats suggested that it was because of the improper garbage collection settings which resulted in the high transaction response time. So now once the root cause was identified, we worked with the engineering team and we were able to identify the right setting for the garbage collection. Now once this was done, the next challenge was that how would we validate that these are the right settings? So what we did was we ran another test, similar test, where everything was kept similar in terms of load, TPS, etc., including the duration. And we created a dashboard and we captured certain stats. The idea was to compare these 2 test results, one with the original issues that was displayed in blue color, and the one with the new settings on garbage collection represented by red color. And we did a multi-way comparison. And this is what the comparison fetches us. So idea here is to compare before and after. So before is represented by blue color and after by red color. So you can see that while there was a spike earlier in the average transaction response time, in the newer test there is no significant spike. While there was a significant spike in terms of transaction failures, there will be certain transaction failures, but definitely not that significant in terms of what was received or achieved, seen earlier. And then cumulative time taken by GC has also been significantly reduced. The processing time or the CPU time taken has also been reduced. So all of this resulted in validating that the fixes that have been applied in form of new garbage collection settings are primarily the right settings for the user. And then those issues never showed up again in the production environment. So this is how some of these capabilities of monitoring specific stats within the test environment allow you to get more deeper insight into your application performance. And then by using advanced features such as pattern matching or multi-way comparison, you'll be able to validate whether the fixes have been done properly or not. And then there are several other benefits that arise that come out of the monitoring on the DevOps side. So you'll be able to automate your workflows, shift left in a much, much, much better way by having more insight into the performance stats. I also want to talk about another real life example as to how we have contributed in terms of a specific business value by enabling deep dive monitoring within the test environment. So Pathkind Laboratories is one of the fastest growing subsidiary of, the fastest growing pharmaceutical company called Mankind Pharma. Uh, this company started very recently, but as, as one of the most fastest moving organization, forward moving organization because of their ability. And currently, as we speak, they are one of the leading providers of testing on COVID-19 as well recently. So for them, the issue was that at one point in time, their lab information management system had ability to register around 5,000 patients in a day. But they had tremendous stress on that application. There were almost 30% transaction failures. Now, with deep dive monitoring and having a proper test environment set up, which they did with help of Cavisson, they were able to achieve not only 25,000 patient registrations on the same infrastructure, but they were also able to reduce the transaction failures down to 5%. So this is a huge improvement because you can imagine earlier they had to spin up new VMs to support excessive load more than 5,000. So whenever they used to have a camp, medical camp or some special ops for doing tests, they had to set up more VMs because the infrastructure wouldn't allow them. So in way of performance tuning their application, their lab information system, we were able to allow them to save lots of cost related to infrastructure by performance tuning and optimizing the capacity of their application because of performance monitoring as well as proper test strategy implementation within their test environment. So this is the kind of benefit we have enabled at Pathkind Laboratories. And then there's another example for a tier 1 retailer. This is a separate one from the one example that I took earlier. For this retailer, we've helped them to reduce the abandoned shopping cart rates by more than 75%, enabling tremendous revenue growth. And we were able to do this by enabling deep dive monitoring, but specifically having them focused on end user experience monitoring within the monitoring layers that we recommend or suggest. And by doing so, they were able to reduce the abandoned shopping cart by around 75%. So that has been a huge positive gain for this retailer. Now, besides this, we have helped a lot of retailers, tier 1 retailers in US to prepare for the peak as well as do capacity planning to ensure that their peak holiday season, peak sales holiday season goes well, which is typically Thanksgiving during the end of the November every year, which is the peak sales season for every retailer. Besides this, we have worked with a lot of companies, including private enterprises as well as government agencies. So as we speak, we are working with National Health Agency in India that is responsible for one of the world's largest affordable care program. And as we speak, they have a lot of role to play with the COVID pandemic control. So they are also involved there, and we are basically responsible to performance tune their application to provide a best and the optimal performance. So we are currently working with a lot of companies, including these that you are currently seeing on your screen. How we are able to enable and deliver this is primarily because of our full stack offering. So we are perhaps one of those rare companies who provide a full stack offering around application performance engineering, right from performance testing, which includes load testing, performance testing, real device testing, real browser user testing, service virtualization, and as well as SaaS-based performance testing solutions. And then we extend this and complement testing as well as production performance by providing monitoring technology that includes application performance management that primarily relates to monitoring of your application server, VMs, JVMs, infrastructure, containers, Dockers, application layer, application servers, database, middleware, and any other infrastructure components within your application stack, as well as combine that with user experience monitoring, and then of course log indexing and monitoring for auto correlation of anything across any layer. So that's how Cavisson provides a full stack offering. By the way, all of these products are standalone enterprise great products in their own right, and it's not necessary to that somebody needs to buy everything, to have them working in an environment. But if you have something already in place, Cavisson can coexist with an existing technology. But this is what we offer. And then there are benefits of a unified dashboard, as I mentioned earlier. So here, what a unified dashboard and a full stack integrated end-to-end offering looks like. So whether you are monitoring client side, which is end user experience, including browser or devices for a mobile native application, or you are monitoring network, or you are monitoring server or application or database or infrastructure components or even log patterns, all of that is represented and visualized in a unified dashboard, which allows user an ability to have a full drill down or diagnostic across all these layers. At the same time, it allows user to have auto anomaly detection and correlation with business KPIs. Now, all of this is automatically combined with the load testing and performance testing that you see on the top, as well as service virtualization. So this is what a full stack end-to-end integrated offering looks like. And a unified dashboard and unified features have their own benefit, which probably we'll talk about in separate sessions or in separate webcasts coming in near future. Talking about Cavisson, we are around 10 years old company. We are headquartered in Santa Clara. We have our offshore development center based out of Noida, where we have close to 800 plus performance experts just based out of Noida itself. We have a small office in Hyderabad, and we plan to open a new office in Bengaluru, down South India, just to ensure that we have more coverage and visibility with the Tier 1 global SIs as well as for strategic initiatives. Let's look into the key takeaways from this webcast. And this is more about displacing some common monitoring misconception. And one of them, and which is the primary one, is that monitoring was considered APM, application performance management, and it was considered that APM is more suitable for production environment, but which is not the case. Monitoring is APM, yes, it is, but it is suited for production as well as test environment. APM has the kill power for all issues. Surely it does have, but when enabled within the test environment also, besides the production environment. Like we have seen that there was a low ROI achieved on APM installation for those respondents who didn't have had a proper test strategy. So it makes and brings more benefits if you have monitoring enabled within your test environment. And then, of course, monitoring was considered expensive. Well, if you determine and if you see the value delivered out of monitoring, you'll find it really very, very inexpensive compared to the value delivered out of this. So these are some of the common monitoring misconceptions, that actually were displaced. I believe you will be able to correlate with all of these. So we got few questions from the attendees. Now let me pick those questions one by one. Okay, so the first question is, will this close all the issues which remain in open state currently? Well, the idea and how we have worked with our customers over the past few years, we have seen that that ratio of 30-70 open and fixed definitely comes down. That open issue ratio definitely and significantly come down. We don't guarantee that all the issues will be fixed, but definitely it gives you an ability to minimize that ratio and bring it down to maybe 1%, 2% also in certain scenarios. The second question is, what will you need to analyze our environment to find tangible benefits we can sure shot achieve by monitoring, or to tell what percentage of improvements can we accept from the parameters that you have spoken? Uh, well, like I said, if we have to analyze your environment, the first thing that we'll look into is probably what does your application infrastructure stack looks like? What does it comprises? How are the calls and the flows moving within your infrastructure? And then we recommend what needs to be instrumented, what needs to be monitored. Based on your production traffic, we'll derive certain scenarios that needs to be simulated within the test environment. So we'll recommend what capabilities you require within your test environment to reproduce a production-like scenario. By the way, we also have capabilities to replay the excess logs and simply recreate the as a scenario that you achieved in your production environment. So if you want to know more about how you can replay excess log and simply recreate those production-like scenarios within the test environment, uh, we can probably have a separate session for that. Then we have another question that says that what are the major key benefits of having monitoring capabilities? I believe that was covered in one of the slides, which is talking about that you get an ability to accelerate your test cycles, by the way, by ensuring that you have a more cleaner version of the applications deployed into the production environment. That's one thing. Similarly, if you are able to induce issues early in the application lifecycle and fix them and validate the fixes, that is the most cost-effective way to ensure the performance of your application rather than fixing those issues when they start showing up in the production environment. And then, of course, it will not hamper your usual release cycles, because if there's deviation in roadmap and delays in roadmaps, that is also another indirect cost to the entire development and engineering teams. So those are the key major benefits that I'll talk about besides saving on the infrastructure. If you have proper monitoring, if you are able to do a proper capacity planning, you'll be able to save on infrastructure cost, as well as we have seen in the example of one of our customers, the use case that I cited out recently. Okay, so feel free to share your questions. You can send them to marketing@cavisson.com, and we'll be glad to answer all these questions offline as well. For all the attendees, we have some giveaways. We'll like to extend free performance test licenses for enterprise usage for 3 months. So some of the attendees, almost all of the attendees will get these licenses to be used in their environment. So stay tuned for our next topic of the webcast, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, and wish you a good time. Stay healthy and stay clear of any issues. Thank you so much.